Hello, everyone from the Just Transition Lobby. It's really a pleasure to have you all here for a chat with the Architecture Lobby. We're really excited to share and discover about the work y'all have been doing. It's very powerful, and yeah, tell us a bit about who everyone is on this call.
I can go first. My name's Charlie Edmonds. I co-founded Architects Front, and outside of that, I work for a community interest company in Birmingham called Civic Square. And alongside these two and many others, we started the Just Transition Lobby a few years ago.
Hello, my name is Funmbi Adeagbo. I am an architect, chartered architect practicing, part of the Just Transition Lobby, one of the candidates for the last RIBA presidential election with the support of the Just Transition. And I am an activist, campaigner, work with Simeon and Charlie and the rest in trying to improve working conditions and generally the profession of architecture for people who are from underrepresented backgrounds. Yeah, that's me.
And hi, I'm Shtbunaev. I train in architecture, but I've moved now more into town planning. I work for a company called Social Life and in many different hats several years ago after being at the trustee of the RIBA. After that, we decided that we need to change something. So we started the Just Transition Lobby and sort of instigate some change, which hopefully is still in progress.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing about yourselves. So we just wanted to hop right in with the first question that we have. What are one or two key problems that you engage with that you and other architecture workers face?
So when we set the Just Transition up, we had sort of three loose key issues that we've distilled since that. Generally, the need to embed climate and nature crisis in the core of what the industry does. I think, a big change is coming and we're not prepared as a profession. We also talked about the need to acknowledge the material and cultural conditions and obviously labor rights of workers in the profession, and even just acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of workers in the profession. And also finally to embed a genuine culture shift to a more equitable, inclusive profession, not just sort of tick box, but actually genuinely change the culture of working. And what we've been focusing on is sort of reclaiming those institutions, I guess, sort of using them as levels of powers. And the lobby is that it's a sort of a loose collective that forms when structures are needed, and primarily for lobbying and reforming architectural and obviously other institutional leadership. But that's kind of where we started from. But it's been an evolution as we've kind of moved through. I don't know about Charlie, maybe, and Funbi, you have something to add.
Yeah, I've just exactly as Simeon has said it. I joined the Just Transition kind of as a worker for workers in terms of getting into those positions. So a couple of years ago, they weren't formed and they helped the current president, the same parties helped the current president get into a position of power in terms of the RIBA, that's the Royal Institute of British Architects, as our architectural uh, chartered body. And they typically, you wouldn't see workers in those positions. It's typically business leaders or owners. And I think that there was the sense that we needed to address representation, that, the profession is diverse, is made of different categories of people, including workers and leaders. And we needed to see representation and balance in that. And that was what, when I saw the Just Transition being posted, it was like it attracted me to kind of join the movement, join that. And then with the help of the Just Transition, I put myself forward to join on the RIBA Council. That was like to kind of buttress that first, win of getting the president in, and then we need not just one person, because it's a get away from this idea of superheroes. We need a community of people who are working together. And then, yeah, recently we ran a campaign again to try and secure that presidential position, which was last year. And I didn't win, but I'm still in the council for another 3 years. So that's kind of, we've got more people. And then also the population of people with, again, representing all the things that Simeon has said, it has increased. So year in and year out, we've been able to continue to push forward and ensure that there's more representation from a really diverse group of people. in the institutions.
Yeah, I guess I don't have too much to add to obviously what these guys have covered already. I suppose from my point of view, um, it's quite reflective of how alienated from the wider labor movement that architecture is, why we are kind of organizing in this way. Obviously, in the UK, if you're a train driver, if you're a university worker, you have well-established union bodies like the RMT, UCU, who can obviously fight your corner and represent your case. But in the UK, much like the US, there hasn't really been a organized labor movement in architecture for decades, if arguably ever. Though the emerging kind of labor movements that we're starting to see now in the UK, you have SAW that started in 2019. Obviously, you have the recent union movements in the US as well. I think these are obviously really important in terms of building worker power. But at the same time, because it's such a alien concept in the UK and the US, and because you know architects are so generally reticent to think of themselves as workers, we thought it was important to kind of complement this more conventional labor and union organizing with an approach of trying to shift institutions. And places like the RIBA are obviously culturally very significant. The RIBA has an enormous endowment, has some pretty high value assets in terms of like property around the country. So it is a very worthwhile sort of target in terms of trying to capture a space like this for the interests of workers and for the interests of the climate and global justice, as Simeon outlined earlier. So I think, yeah, for us, that's kind of strategically how we see this approach to trying to leverage institutions. So it's not kind of like the answer. It's not the thing that's going to solve all our problems, but it is something that is complementary to kind of wider struggles for, you know, justice across multiple lines, be that labor, be that wider social equity, be that climate, and so on and so on.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I think Charlie's making a very good point. I think some of us, the RIBA was the institution we targeted because a lot of us were involved in the RIBA one way or another. We had either we were members or we were within the governing organizations. But in the UK context, there is a big post-colonial sort of like just a wave that just continues with those institutions. They're all royal charters. They're all in that kind of mindset of capitulation to capital. They're just doing what clients want. And there is a bit of almost in the industry as a whole, there's a bit of powerlessness about who we are as a civic society and as professionals. And I think that's also what we're targeting. Is just you're not just an institution that protects a profession. You're also a kind of an active member of civic society.
And just to kind of round off what Simeon is saying, I think many of us who join the architectural profession and the construction industry, we do see ourselves, especially if you come from certain backgrounds, that as people who are supposed to enact change in the world, we see all of these social problems. The construction industry is one of the biggest polluting bodies. And this idea that, we really need to stop talking about issues and actually being active members and agents of that. And that does come down to who is in those governing institutions, who makes the decisions. And when you're part of that group of people that is most disproportionately affected, you do come up with more passion. And it's, again, getting people into the positions of power so that we can actually actively enact change and stop talking about it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And that kind of perfectly segues into the next question I was going to ask, which is what do you think of the traditional institutions that represent and govern our profession, such as professional organizations, architecture schools, or the Venice Biennale?
I'll open that and then we can move. But I think we are kind of focused on reform the professional bodies because they exist. I think we're not under any illusion that they're the best vehicle of kind of change. And I think we have had that discussion a lot of times. Some if things are not working, probably some of them are will have to evolve or kind of die, or we can create new institutions. But in the UK context, we are really kind of targeting the ones that are under the Construction Industry Council, which are the established professional chartered bodies, the ones that actually protect either the function or the titles or whatever it is of the different professions, and the RIBA is one of them. And I think we've targeted specifically leadership positions because we understood that unless you have the people on the board who change their mentality, the rest changes very slowly. And the idea of, sort of bottom up is great until you face the sort of reluctance and the small lobby interests within the group. And our kind of campaign has been about seizing majority on those boards. We have had some successes, I think, with the previous president. I think he's not been a majority in that board, so it's been difficult. So I think that's where we kind of come from. So our thinking is we're not under any illusion. I think that they obviously have a lot of cultural hangover, and they might not be the best vehicles for change, but they exist. So why not go through them first?
Yeah, and just to kind of add to that is like the idea of not really starting from scratch, because the time that these institutions have existed, they've amassed a lot of social value and credit in terms of influence. And in order we're starting kind of from grassroots, from the baseline. If you're trying to be able to create a movement, sometimes you need to have multiple ways of approaching that. So, with the just transition, it's one player in a wider vehicle of change. There's many, many ways to change. That change can be enacted, but what we need is the momentum to enact change at all the angles. So where there's resistance, again, could be within certain types of bodies, through mentality, through priorities. We need to be placing people, and we have a huge workforce, we have a huge body of people with interest. So we need to be targeting and putting people strategically. And it's working strategically within these institutions. It's not to say that, these are the only ways of enacting change. They're the best ways of enacting change. There's not a single thing. And I think what's really, really important is that when you're trying to create real social change, is not to focus on one aspect of it, but embrace the diversity of processes that you could ways of changing things. So it's, again, there's no one fixed stitch, and that's, again, moving away from that mentality, because often people can be disheartened when they think, oh, I've tried this and it's not worked. But if everyone's trying everything, something's going to give, and that's really, really key.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest barriers to architectural workers, actively fighting for better conditions for themselves and everyone else is sort of a very, very deep apathy that kind of rests like a miasma over the profession, especially in the UK, I feel. And I don't think it's particularly surprising that things are this way, because I've always thought that like architectural training is a bit like an incredibly cruel social experiment where you send people to university, and you teach them about all of the incredible social potential that architecture and the built environment has, and all of the things that architecture could be doing and should be doing. And then you launch them out into a world where generally the maximum capacity of what you can do as an architect is to gentrify in inner city neighborhood. And that's the scope of your professional capacity in many, many cases in private practice, right? So it is kind of a process of like creating an enormous sense of like empathy and social intention, and then like smashing it with a big hammer in the world of private practice. So I don't think it's surprising at all that people in this field are often very hopeless and very apathetic and don't really believe that change is possible. And so I think for me, the way that we relate to existing institutions is to one, sort of understand that in their kind of natural state, they are aligned with architectural business, and they are aligned with capital in that sense, because overwhelmingly in the UK, over 99% of architectural work is private. So inherently, institutions have to support the business case of architecture, and the business case of architecture is aligned with the perspectives of employers and people running these businesses. So I think we have to understand that in their kind of natural state, these institutions are opposed to workers' interests fundamentally due to the fact that they are supporting the interests of businesses and business owners. And then for us, I think the act of leveraging these spaces, the benefits are kind of twofold. One is it can unlock resources to support like movements and policies and things that we believe in. You know, if the RIBA can ban unpaid overtime in their practices, for example, that's a very clear and tangible win that can be achieved through leveraging these institutions. But also on a more kind of broad level, I think organizing to leverage these institutions acts as a really important proof of concept, because when we originally campaigned to get Moiwa elected as the RIBA president, I think a lot of the purpose of doing that was not to assume that this one guy could go in and turn the whole institute upside down and fix every problem. But the value of doing that, from my point of view at least, was to say, hey, a group of people with no institutional power, organizing through grassroots methods with no funding behind them, can win the kind of primary seat in our main institutional body in the UK. So again, it's something that I think a big part of it is trying to fight back against that apathy and fight back against that kind of like learned hopelessness that a lot of architects have developed. So yeah, I think in my head that's a big thing about the way that we're organizing and the way that we're relating to existing institutions. They are not our saviors. They are not going to fix these problems, but they are important vehicles in securing certain wins and building a sense of like hope and a capacity to fight amongst architectural workers, in my opinion.
Yeah, just again, I think there's a very key thing of seizing power in those places and opening up that conversation, because if you're not there or represented in those bodies, institutions, we can't really influence change. They will carry on with in absence of any influence. And again, as Charlie said, you know, that probably social experiment of getting someone into a really, really prestigious seat was demonstrating that, you know, no matter there's no position that's too high for anyone to occupy, and when there's enough momentum within ordinary people, you're able to actually enact change. It might be small steps at a time or big leaps. And I think also in the UK, and I think it's probably globally, the architecture profession is in an existential crisis, because we are still tied into those colonial views, the architect as the sole trader, where in reality, the business case is the architect isn't the sole hero of the story. It's the collective, the workers and everyone in that actually produces what we got. And if everyone, the workers and the majority of society is leaning to a certain value, shouldn't we steer the ship in the direction that we all want, and we feel that will actually benefit the majority of us? And honestly, the idea that, you know, this kind of change will be detrimental to the status quo is actually false, because we know, and there's many examples of when the whole group benefits, even that person at the top is in a better position at the end. It might take small sacrifices for people to adjust psychologically and in terms of all the things that they're used to, but when we actually collectively work together, the outcome is better. Human beings are social animals, and we've always existed like that for thousands of years. It's just this recent thing that the I and we seem to believe that we can operate independently of the main group.
And I just very quickly, just because I've been on board of two of those institutions, it's actually also false to think that internally people have, there is a lot of groupthink in those organizations. So once you put another person in there to question the existing structures, you see how things start breaking or people start questioning, because actually there's a lot of momentum. People go on these boards and they don't even think why they're there. They don't question their own positionality. And that positionality might be enmeshed with capital that doesn't serve them at all. So that changes as well once you have another person in that position.
Well, thank you all for an incredible discussion. It's really enlightening to hear the thought that you all put into both how you approach institutional work, but also recognizing the limits of that and how it can be strategically used at the same time to address like wide-ranging socio-economic and colonial systems that are very prevalent within the profession.